Welcome back. Let's actually try and deploy this function so we can test it out. For now, I'm going to change the name of this function to something like Rankly. So handler Rankly, or let's just keep it with rank. And this means that I'll have to change the name over here to rank. And the other thing I want to do is right now, because this is development purposes, another option I can uncomment and leave is what we call a stage, where we can put dev or prod. And this attaches a name to our Lambda function for production or development. And it's usually a good practice to just have the dev flag so you can test things out, and then when it's ready for production to change that to prod. All right, and the next thing I want to do is I also want to change our service name. If we look at the comments over here, I see that note, update this with your service name. And if we remember, our name on AWS is not AWS Node.js. It needs to be updated with our name, which is Rankly Lambda. So I'm going to change the name of our service to Rankly Lambda. I'm going to save the serverless YAML file, and then I'm going to go into handler.js. Now, we haven't really talked too much about handler.js. Let's bring that up here like that. Now, there's three main things that we want to focus on here. One is the fact that we're just worried about a function. Lambda needs to run a function. So everything should be inside of this rank command. And that's the main principle. Now, this function is going to get run based on a trigger event. And that's what an event object is. Whatever triggers it, we're going to get that object of that trigger. And this event, like we talked about, can be anything. It could be an HTTP request. It could be an S3 request. We are able to configure that. And we also have this idea of resources, where this Lambda function can use external resources, like an S3 bucket, for example. Now, the key thing to remember here is that Lambda by itself is what we call stateless. That is, it's not going to remember anything for us. Remember, these things are created because the function is stored in a database, and when it's ready to be invoked, it's going to be put into a container by Amazon, and it's going to get run. And after it's done running and there's no more requests, it's going to get put back into the database, or that container is going to go down. And there's no way to remember anything. So you want to keep your functions stateless. And if you ever want to store information or data, you can use DynamoDB or an S3 bucket. Again, something that you can do quite easily in the serverless YAML file. Now, within this function, we see that we have a few things. And I want to focus your attention on the last line here, callback null response. Now, this callback function is what triggers the response of this entire function. And the way Lambda works is that you get a callback with an error and a response. In our case, the response is status code 200 with a body that is JSON of message and input. And this input is going to have the event object. Now, this error over here, we're not going to really ever use it on Lambda because underneath the hood, there's something called Lambda proxy that's being integrated. And by default, this is something that's taken care of for us. So if you ever want to send an error with Lambda, instead of changing this here, you would do a status code of, for example, 400 in your response. Now, let's actually deploy this and see what happens. I'm going to save this function. And all we need to do with serverless, since we've already connected it to AWS, we've changed the name in serverless YAML to our Rankly Lambda. We can simply run serverless or SLS deploy. Oh, and we have a bit of an error. And we have bad indentation. Again, it's a YAML file, so we have to make sure the indentation is absolutely correct. Let's try that again. Going to save, deploy again. looks like everything got deployed. And it's got some really nice outputs here. We see that it's uploading to CloudFormation. And we're also uploading the zip file, because what it does underneath the hood is actually zip all our files and load them to our S3, or not to our, but to their S3 bucket, so that whenever they need that function, they'll create the container and grab it from the S3. And it does a few things underneath the hood, but the main part is that our service information is now all set. You see that our functions are ready. It's called Rankly Lambda Dev Rank. Again, we have the dev attached here because we've made the stage to dev. And there's no API keys or endpoints that we've given it. But our function is now running. Very, very cool. Now, how can we actually test this? Well, one thing we can do is we can run the SLS invoke -- function, and we can invoke the function that we have. Let's call the function that we had was called rank. So let's give that a go. Hey, look at that. It invoked our function from our container, from our Lambda function on AWS. We got a status code of 200 with the body of Go Serverless 1.0. If we go back here, look at that. That's awesome. Now, when you're testing it like this, you might not want to invoke the Lambda function every time because, well, it might cost you money, especially if you're doing this a lot. Another way that you can do this is to actually say invoke local -- function rank. And local means, hey, I won't touch your Lambda function. I'm going to try and simulate the Lambda function and run this locally so that we won't charge you for anything. And again, don't get too stressed out about this. You have 1 million requests a month. You're fine. You're not going to get charged for Lambda function unless you're doing something absolutely insane or you have crazy amount of users. So for now, let's try this out. Hey, look at that. It works. Now, this local only works because our function is nice and simple. If it, for example, was dependent on an S3 resource or another resource that Amazon has, it might not work. But for our purposes, this is a great testing ground. All right, the last thing I want to do is I want to get this ready for what we want to do. That is, we want to have an endpoint, an HTTP trigger event that we can trigger this function with. Because in our SmartBrain app, I'm not going to be able to just run SLS invoke -- function rank. We know that now it exists, but I want to have an HTTP endpoint. And we can simply do that by scrolling down to our functions. And you see here in the events that there's an HTTP path method that we can use. So I'm just going to copy this over here, paste it, and add it to the rank functions that we have. And in here, I want to, well, first of all, I want to have HTTP. The path is going to be whatever we want. So let's just say rank. And the method is going to be a get method. We just want to get the message. Now let's save that. And underneath the hood, what this is going to do is actually use another service by AWS called API Gateway to give us an HTTP endpoint to actually trigger this event. Let me show you what that means. Let's deploy once again, run our SLS deploy. And the beauty is that, well, serverless just does this automatically for us, talks to AWS and makes sure that everything is running smoothly. And there we go. We have everything deployed. Remember, our region is US East 1 because that's what we've set. It's stage dev. And look at that. We now have an endpoint. And it gave us a URL that looks like an Amazon URL, but with my path of rank with the dev command because we're still in development. And now let's test this out. Let's see if this actually works. I'm going to open up the browser. Let's open up a new window in the browser. And in here, let's paste this in. How cool is that? We just triggered that Lambda function that lives somewhere on Amazon servers we triggered it with an event, and that event has all these things. First of all, we have a message that says go serverless. Remember, in our function here, if we go over here, we're returning a body with message, go serverless, and an input, which is the event. Now, the event here, you can see, gives us information about the browser that I just sent the event from. I see that, all right, I have my headers, it was path rank, it was a GET request, and so on and so forth. I can see that I'm doing a ton of things. I'm using HTTP1 and all these event information. But just like that, we have an Amazon Lambda function. Super, super simple. Now, all we need to do now is actually make this function do something useful for us, because right now we don't really care. Let's go back to what we had before. Right now, we don't really care about just receiving the event. We want to do the ranking system of our SmartBrain app. Perhaps give people some emojis based on the user's ranking. So in the next video, we're going to start doing that. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'll see you in that one. Bye-bye.